why NBA teams are terrified of the second apron, and why the Celtics might be quietly outmaneuvering it a year ago. The Boston Celtics were crowned NBA champions for the 18th time in franchise history. Today, just 14 months later, that roster looks like a memory. Tatum, Brown, White, Pritchard, and Hauser. That's all that's left of the core that raised Banner 18. To the casual fan, it might feel like panic. To those watching closely, it's a chess match against a new villain hiding in plain sight. The second apron. You might think the Celtics simply decided to reshuffle the deck after Tatum's Achilles injury shattered their playoff hopes. But that's not the whole picture. Boston didn't blow up a championship roster because it panicked. They did it because staying the course might have cost them $500 million. That's not an exaggeration. If they kept everyone, they were looking at a payroll that would have shattered every precedent in NBA history. And for what? A broken star, a crowded cap table, and a second apron trap designed to punish ambition. The second apron isn't just a soft cap, it's a guillotine, and every team is now forced to count their fingers after every move. Celtics president Brad Stevens admitted as much when he said, "I didn't realize how real it was until I saw it in action." And he wasn't alone. Across the league, powerhouses are blinking. The Timberwolves dealt Karl-Anthony Towns to New York, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. That trade cleared just enough room to bring back Julius Randle and Nez Reid, but they still lost Nickel Alexander-Walker. The Clippers. They let Paul George walk to Philadelphia because matching the Sixers' 4-year, $211 million offer would have locked them in apron hell. "We wanted Paul back," Steve Ballmer admitted, "but we couldn't risk becoming irrelevant trying to stay relevant." That sentence might be the most honest summary of the second apron era yet. But here's where it gets even more dangerous and less understood. Teams above the second apron can't just spend freely. They face draft death. Once you're over, you can't trade your first-round pick 7 years into the future. For the Celtics, Timberwolves, and Suns, that means their 2032 picks are frozen. And it gets worse. Stay above the apron for 2 of the next 4 years, and those frozen picks get downgraded to the end of the first round. A championship-caliber team could end up drafting at 29th, even if they collapse mid-season. That's a penalty with real brutal consequences. If a team drops below the second apron for at least one of the next 3 seasons, that pick becomes tradable again, but not until 2028 at the earliest. The Celtics, Timberwolves, and Suns all dropped under in 2025-26, signaling they're already playing this high-stakes long game. Meanwhile, only one team, the Cavaliers, currently sits above the second apron. And with playoff failure looming, whispers have already begun about whether they'll be forced to dump a big contract just to survive the storm. So how did we get here? The apron itself moves each season, following the salary cap increases. In 2024-25, the gap between the first and second apron was around $11 million. In 2025-26, it's almost $12 million. But don't get comfortable. Right before free agency, the NBA dropped a bombshell. The league's latest projections show a smaller salary cap increase than expected in 2026-27. Only 7% instead of the maximum 10%. That shortfall forces every team to scale back their projections by roughly $5 million in luxury tax and apron thresholds. This unexpected squeeze is the result of declining regional sports network revenue, which is threatening the NBA's future earnings even as new national TV deals approach. Translation: teams that gambled on a richer future might now be racing to correct course before it's too late. And that's why Boston's apparent overhaul isn't a meltdown. It's a maneuver. The Celtics aren't panicking. They're preparing. Shedding salary now, avoiding being locked out of flexibility in 2026, 2027, and beyond. Giving themselves a shot at controlling their draft capital, avoiding pick downgrades, and staying aggressive when other contenders are handcuffed. This isn't retreat. It's reload. Second apron is reshaping team building as we know it. Smart teams, the ones with patience, foresight, and a willingness to make bold moves before the league forces their hand, will thrive. The others will be trapped by their own ambition, paying top dollar for rosters they can't improve. Boston might have looked like they were tearing things down. But what if they're actually setting up their next dynasty? Celtics blinked. First, not out of fear, but out of strategy. And if Brad Stevens is right, that might be the move that keeps them a step ahead, and everyone else is forced to fold. How experts are really reading the Celtics offseason: a calculated reset or a silent power move? The 2025 offseason was never going to be ordinary for the Boston Celtics, but Jason Tatum's torn Achilles didn't just complicate the plan, It ripped the blueprint to shreds. What came next wasn't a panic move. It was something colder, sharper, and far more strategic than most realize. The kind of offseason that doesn't shout, but whispers about the long game. On the surface, losing Kristaps, Porziņģis, and Jrue Holiday might look like cost-cutting, but that's not the full picture. Boston didn't just trim payroll to dodge the second apron. They initiated a full structural recalibration. The Celtics front office, led by Brad Stevens, quietly pivoted from championship contention to future-proofing without letting go of a single future first-round pick. That's not retreating, that's reloading. What's shocking isn't what Boston gave up, but how they gave it up, and why. Every piece moved, every dollar cleared, every inch of cap space recovered was aimed at one thing: preparing for life without Tatum, not just temporarily, but potentially through the 2026 season and beyond. The Achilles timeline is unforgiving. Best case, Tatum is moving again by next summer. Worst case, his return to dominance might not happen until 2027. Boston acted accordingly, so they flipped Porziņģis and Holiday, not just to save money, but to rewire the roster's DNA in return. They landed Anfernee Simons, a 25-year-old guard with high-octane scoring ability and a manageable contract that could be flipped again by the trade deadline. They brought in Georges Niang, who doesn't turn heads, but can hit shots and stretch the floor when it matters. And they drafted Hugo Gonzalez, a hyper-athletic international wing with massive upside if developed properly. That's the part being overlooked. Boston didn't just lose size or experience. They shed inflexibility. They peeled away the layers that locked them into a specific window and gave themselves room to breathe in the cap space chaos of the new CBA. Every expert agrees, surviving the second apron isn't just important, it's existential. Most teams ignore it until they're buried under it. Boston got out early, but here's where it gets deeper. Every player taller than 6'8", who logged at least 13 playoff minutes in 2025, is gone. That's not just a stat, that's a red alert about what Boston must fix. Al Horford's IQ and floor spacing, Porziņģis, shot blocking and mismatch creation, even fringe rotation bigs, all gone. What remains is a front-court patch worked with projects like Luka Garza and Josh Minot, names that don't move the needle yet, but are placeholders for what might come next. This is where the hope kicks in. Because if Boston had simply accepted their fate, they wouldn't have prioritized draft capital and tradable contracts. They wouldn't have positioned themselves under the second apron with a clean cap sheet and a war chest of flexibility. They wouldn't have trusted Jaylen Brown and Derek White to anchor the locker room while the storm passes. They wouldn't have bet on finding value where no one else is looking. The truth is, no one knows exactly how the Celtics will look when Tatum returns. That's the point. Boston doesn't want to win now. They want to win next. They want to spend this season quietly testing young players, flipping tradable contracts, and watching the rest of the league burn money trying to survive the apron apocalypse. Boston wants to be ready when everyone else is stuck. That's why experts are split. Some see loss, others see preparation. But the most honest ones are asking, what if this isn't a step back? What if this is a pivot that sets up a monster leap? What if Brad Stevens is assembling something we're not supposed to recognize yet? If the Celtics manage to move Simons before the deadline, they'll be well under the tax, giving them a chance to reset the repeater clock. That opens the door to massive free agent flexibility as soon as 2026, add a healthy Tatum, a still prime Jaylen, and cap space in a shallow market. And suddenly Boston isn't just back, they're dangerous again. This is the hidden message. Behind Boston's offseason, it's not about who left, it's about who might arrive. It's not about how bad it looks now, it's about how fast it could flip. This is the kind of season where teams fall apart or find themselves. The Celtics. They're betting they're closer to the second option. And if they're right, everyone who doubted this offseason is going to wish they'd looked a little closer. What if the most important Celtic story of the Summer League wasn't about stats, but about survival? Not just individual performances, but futures hanging by a thread. Some players arrived in Vegas fighting for a shot, others for relevance, and a few for redemption. And when the dust settled, opinions didn't just shift, they flipped upside down. Let's start with Kenneth Lofton Jr. His name carried weight, literally and figuratively. A former G League star, a player with the kind of physicality you don't teach. He walked into Summer League with expectations glued to his back, but something didn't click. His strength was real, but so were the limitations. Listed at 6'6", Lofton struggled to assert himself consistently in the paint against longer, quicker bigs. And in a roster with zero margin for inefficiency, that could matter more than we think. Then there's Baylor Scheierman. If Vegas was a stress test for readiness, Scheierman passed it in a way that doesn't show up in flashy highlights. His shooting was cold, but everything else, ice in his veins. His 6.8 assists per game quietly ranked top 5 in the entire summer league. A stat that says more about his processing speed than any step-back three could. The Celtics don't just need shooting, they need decision-making under pressure. Is trending toward that rare category of role player who actually elevates the stars around him. He may not explode on opening night, but don't be surprised if he finishes the season as a rotation lock. Now enter Jordan Walsh, arguably the most polarizing name in the group. 1 year ago, most fans had written him off. His rookie summer league was forgettable. His regular season minutes were crumbs, and his roster spot looked more like a favor than a future. But something changed. Walsh didn't just survive this summer league, he looked like he belonged. His ability to penetrate, draw contact, and finish through length gave Boston a glimpse of a wing who might finally have something no one else on the roster offers. Self-creation on a discount contract, he didn't dominate, but he created enough noise to silence the doubts. The moment he started pushing the ball in transition like a guard, the Celtics saw flashes of something rare. A big who doesn't panic under pressure, who understands spacing and can handle the ball across the timeline without coughing it up. But his reads were real, and that's not a trait you find in 6'10" projects every day. Keep his name in the memory bank. Kendall Brown was maybe the biggest blindside of them all. No hype, no press, just production. Athleticism, rim pressure, finishing, gave Boston something different. And maybe that's the point. The roster full of elite shooters and switchable wings, Brown's pure explosiveness stood out because it was rare. But maybe the decision was more strategic than emotional. By letting him walk, Boston signaled something, that the bar has risen. The Celtics aren't interested in long-term projects that don't bring immediate edge. This isn't about cutting losses, it's about raising standards. So who changed our perception the most? The answer isn't just one name. It's a shift in how we view the margins of this roster. The Celtics didn't walk away from Summer League with a star, but they may have walked away with 3 or 4 players who could meaningfully affect their season without ever leading a highlight reel. The question now is not who will shine, but who will stick. And in a year where every inch matters, sticking might be everything. What the release of JD Davison really means for the Celtics offseason, and why no one's talking about it. The Boston Celtics didn't just wave a 22-year-old point guard over the weekend. They opened a secret door. A door that very few are willing to notice because, on the surface, JD Davison's release looks routine. Another young player, another marginal move, a salary of $2,300,000 that wasn't even guaranteed. But this wasn't a financial cleanse. This was a chess piece moving silently across the board while everyone else was busy staring at the King's dot. By releasing Davison Nalby for rosters fully lock in around the league, the Celtics did 2 things at once. They gave him a legitimate shot at a new opportunity under Ime Udoka in Houston, and they unlocked something far more dangerous: optionality. And if you understand the new rules of the NBA's second apron system, you know that optionality isn't just nice to have, it's a weapon. JD Davison was no longer eligible for a 2-way deal in Boston, which means the only way to keep him would have been a guaranteed spot on a 15-man roster already drowning in high-leverage contracts. So, why hold the piece if it can't fit on the board? Especially when that same piece, once removed, helps you dance just below the NBA's most restrictive financial barrier. Now here's where it gets unsettling, because once Davison was waived, Boston's total salary dipped to $205,500,000. That's just $1,900,000 beneath the second apron. And for most franchises, that's a breathing room barely worth mentioning. For Boston, it's a vault key, because by staying under that threshold, the Celtics just unlocked abilities they haven't touched in over a year. First, they can now send cash in trades again. It might sound minor, but with over $7 million available to use across the 2025 to 2026 season, this is the kind of tool that can make a minor deal happen or disappear in hours. Want to unload a contract no one wants? Sweeten the deal with cash. Want to absorb a low-tier contributor who could shine in your system? Cash gets the door open faster than negotiations. Second, and more importantly, Boston can now aggregate salaries again. That means Brad Stevens isn't limited to 1-for-1 trades. He can package multiple players in a single deal and target a contract that actually moves the needle. And while some recent acquisitions like Georgia Niang and Anthony Simons can't, be aggregated until September. This shift already changes the landscape of what Boston can pursue before training camp begins. Imagine stacking mid-tier salaries to chase one undervalued all-star stuck in the wrong system. That window was shut. It's now cracked open. Third. And here's the move. No one's watching closely enough. The long game just came back into focus. By stepping under the second apron this year, the Celtics begin the countdown to unlocking the 2032 first-round pick that was previously frozen under CBA penalties. They need 3 consecutive seasons below that apron for full access. Again, but this is how it starts. Not with a blockbuster trade or a front-page rumor, but with a release of a player like JD Davison. Even the 2033 pick becomes usable again. The moment Boston stays below the line, this changes the long-term asset map entirely. Picks that were previously untouchable now hover in the background like hidden gold. Picks that can be used to trade for star power. Picks that make you dangerous, not just today, but 3 years from now when most rosters will already be unraveling under the pressure of new financial rules. So, what looks like a simple waiver may go down as one of the Celtics' most efficient offseason decisions, because it's not about JD Davison. It's about the butterfly effect. It's about the fact that this franchise, while being punished by success, is still fighting to find every inch of flexibility. And that means that Brad Stevens isn't just playing the game in front of him. He's playing the 1-5 moves ahead. This doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't promise a new blockbuster name before the regular season tips off, but it means Boston can breathe. It means they can explore. And it means they haven't just accepted the brutal constraints of the second apron. They've started working around them silently, efficiently, and maybe, just maybe, brilliantly. Keep your eyes off what they lost. Focus on what they just made possible.